And here comes Joe! The Joe Show! It's started! Centering ball, Joey! Oh, yeah!
Runs to 50, wide open goal, pins back the ears, and kicks up your team!
Daniher! Oh! Maybe that was big!
I must admit that for the majority of his career, I could not stand Joe Daniher. In the beginning, it was less to do with the young man himself and more to do with his surname. It might be hard to believe for those under the age of 30, but the Essendon Football Club were once an absolute powerhouse of the competition. And with that power came supporter entitlement. They were a ruthless club from top to bottom. The supporter base were ruthless and had no hesitation in letting you know just how good their football team was. The coach was ruthless, implementing a brutality and hard-nosed edge to his troops. Now, a brutal game plan required a ruthless captain, and his name was Daniher. Terry Daniher was as hard as they come. Built farm tough, he was equally as effective as a centre-half back or at centre-half forward. He would play over 300 games, win the AFL Players Association MVP, became a 3-time All-Australian, including captaining the team in 1985, and he was also a 2-time Premiership captain with the Bombers when they went back-to-back in 1984 and 1985. Terry's younger brother Neil was the most talented of all the Daniher brothers. He won a best and fairest as a 20-year-old in 1981 and was made captain of the team the following season. But his career would be cruelly cut short by a string of horrific knee injuries. Joe's father Anthony didn't have the talent of his older siblings, but still carved out an impressive career, accumulating over 200 games and was named All-Australian in 1991. A fourth brother, Chris, was the battler of the family, but still managed to play over 100 games and was a part of the Baby Bombers squad that won the flag in 1993. The Daniher name became synonymous with that successful era of Essendon football. People always remember the Hawks being the most dominant side of that time, but the mighty Bombers were not that far behind. In fact, from season 1983, when the two sides faced off in a grand final, through until 2001, when they matched up in a preliminary final, their records stood as follows. The Hawks won 5 flags. The Bombers won 4. The Hawks played in 8 grand finals. The Dons played in 7. Hawthorn won 21 finals in that time span. Essendon won 20. The Hawks won 260.5 home and away matches. The Bombers won 275.5. In just 19 seasons, Essendon finished the season as minor premiers 7 times. The Bulldogs have never done it in their 100-year existence in the league. No wonder their supporters were so up and about. What a dream 20-year run they had. So when the next generation of Danihers started filtering through, I started to get PTSD at the thought of another golden era for the Bombers. So why then would I make a tribute video for a player I didn't like? Well, Big Joe ended up winning me over. It took his whole career to get there, but he went from one of my least liked players to one of my favourites. Most clubs seem to have one now, but it was Joe Daniher who ushered in the era of key forwards who stood over 2 metres tall. Matching Port Adelaide's bid at pick 7 in the 2012 National Draft, the Bombers scored a bargain in coughing up pick 10 for the prodigiously talented Daniher, who at 201 centimetres tall was widely considered as the most talented player in his draft class. Draft guru Cal Toomey had this to say at the time: "The Calder Cannons key forward would have challenged Lachie Whitfield as the number 1 selection if he wasn't committed to the Bombers. When he leaps, he grabs the ball at its highest point and is almost impossible to spoil. He's also very agile when it hits the ground for a player his size, and he has a competitive streak that will shine at AFL level." High praise indeed. After booting 21 goals from 7 VFL games, Daniher would make his debut in round 11 of the 2013 season against Carlton in front of 82,500 people on a Friday night at the MCG, gathering 15 possessions and taking 5 marks from 79% game time. A week later, Daniher would kick his first goal, one of 3 for the day, and take 5 contested marks against the Gold Coast Suns, giving us an early glimpse at his almost unlimited potential.
The running support on the left foot of Daniher, and he just strokes it magnificently.
Despite the promising display, Daniher was overlooked for the next game as the Dons travelled to Subiaco to take on the Eagles, with coach James Hird explaining that Joe needed to find consistency and handle the tempo of an AFL game for the entirety of a match. The Bombers were in 3rd place on the ladder, fighting for a top 4 finish. Daniher was recalled for the top of the table clash against the Hawks in round 18, but the Dons were no match for Hawthorn, who would belt them by 10 goals en route to the first of their 3 consecutive premierships. Joe would be subbed out of the game in the 3rd quarter, having had no impact on the match with just 3 possessions. He would be dropped again. At the conclusion of the match, Essendon coach James Hird would launch an impassioned defence of his players, stating that they were not drug cheats. In February of 2013, the club had self-reported over concerns they had with their own supplements program, with ASADA and the AFL launching a joint investigation. ASADA initially declared that it would be too difficult to achieve a guilty verdict for a supplement that had not explicitly been declared banned. Essendon launched their own independent review into the supplements program and found that there was a lack of proper processes and poor governance practices. CEO Ian Robson would resign in May of 2013, whilst Chairman David Evans would follow suit at the end of July. ASADA would release an interim report to the club and the AFL on the 2nd of August that concurred with the Bombers' own internal findings that its governance was severely lacking. The AFL subsequently charged the Bombers on the 13th of August with bringing the game into disrepute. As all this was unfolding, the Bombers were imploding both on and off the field. After starting the season with a 13-3 record and a 2nd place position on the ladder, the Dons would lose 5 of their last 6 games, finishing with a 14-8 record and a home and away finish of 7th place. On the 27th of August, prior to the final round of the season, the AFL and Essendon agreed to the following sanctions. The club would be ruled ineligible for the upcoming final series for which they had qualified, and coach James Hird was suspended for 12 months, effective immediately. Welcome to the big time, Joe. CEO, president, and coach all gone in his first year. Now, I don't mean to bring up this painful time in Essendon's history just to torment you poor Bombers supporters watching. The reality is that it's a big part of Joe's story. He walked into the club during the most tumultuous time in the club's history, and the whole saga and the subsequent implications would leave a dark shadow hanging over Windy Hill for the entirety of Daniher's tenure at the club. It would not have been an easy time to be an Essendon footballer. Perhaps being young and focusing more on their own growth rather than that of the team was a blessing. But I have nothing but admiration for players like Daniher and Zach Merritt, who forged quality careers out of the fiercest of initiations. Under interim coach Mark Bomber Thompson in 2014, the Dons would galvanise and qualify for the finals. Daniher played in 21 of a possible 23 matches, topping the Bombers' goal kicking with 28 majors for the season. He would also collect his first ever Brownlow votes after he took 6 contested marks, had 7 marks inside 50 and kicked 3 goals for in a round 12 victory against the Giants in just his 16th match. In the elimination final against North Melbourne, Big Joe would kick the opening goal of the match. He would jag his 4th 6 minutes into the last quarter to give the Bombers an 8-point lead. Unfortunately, Essendon could not hold on as the Kangas piled on 5 of the last 6 goals of the match. With Hurd returning for 2015, hopes were high that the Dons were destined for bigger and better things. It proved to be a false dawn as the drug saga would raise its ugly head yet again in 2015. The Dons started nicely enough, winning 3 of their opening 5 games. Daniher would star in a round 8 victory against the Lions, kicking 6 goals and earning 3 Brownlow votes. And then it all fell apart. Hurd would be gone for a second time in late 2015, with the experienced John Worsfold replacing him for the 2016 season. From round 9 of 2015 through until round 20 of 2016, the Bombers would lose 30 games of footy, winning just 3 matches in that time span. Daniher would play every game during those 2 seasons, kicking 34 goals in 2015 and 43 goals in 2016. Once again, topping the goal kicking in both seasons. As the Dons dealt with suspensions to a dozen players, it was the young stars in Merritt and Daniher who would lead the way in 2016. They would finish 1 and 2 in Essendon's best and fairest. 2017 would prove to be Joe Daniher's most productive season, the year his star shone its brightest. As part of the leadership group, Daniher would help to carry the Dons back up the ladder and to an improbable finals berth. He would win the Anzac Medal, Mark of the Year, kick the 3rd most goals across the comp for the season with 65, win All-Australian selection for the first time, and be crowned Essendon's best and fairest. All at the tender age of 23. In his second final, he would again perform despite the Bombers copping a belting at the hands of the Swans, kicking 3 goals from 17 touches. Essendon fans could not have been more pleased with his progress. Just 5 seasons into his career, he was already in the top few key forwards in the league, a true match winner. When compared to the other gun forwards of his generation, Daniher was tracking along beautifully. After 5 completed seasons, Joey had kicked more goals than Josh Kennedy, Tom Hawkins, Tom Lynch and Jesse Hogan, and was only just behind Jack Riewoldt. Jeremy Cameron was a level ahead, whilst Buddy was just an absolute freak. Daniher was rewarded during the season with a 3-year contract extension, seeing him through until the end of 2020. Little did we know that in that 3-year period, Big Joe would add just 18 goals from 15 games. Daniher would start the 2018 season in poor form, kicking just the 8 goals from the opening 7 games of the season as the Bombers slumped to a 2-5 record. Coach John Worsfold toyed with the idea of playing Daniher more in the ruck to get him out of his poor run of form, before it was released in May that Daniher had been carrying a groin issue since the pre-season. In June, Worsfold revealed that the injury was worse than Daniher was letting on, and that he was a long way off playing, stating that the club didn't want the issue to persist into the next pre-season. In July, Daniher was ruled out for the remainder of the season. In December of 2018, it was announced that Daniher was already in doubt for round 1, with the lingering effects of OP still keeping the big man down. In March, Joe would tear his calf, setting him back another 6 weeks. The injury bug had struck. Daniher would return in round 5 of 2019, kicking 2 goals. The following week, he would kick 4 and gather 16 touches on Anzac Day. But he didn't have the same power and strength through his core. He would be shut down for the season after the round 9 victory over the Dockers. The Bombers having taken a conservative approach the previous season, decided on surgery this time around. In August, the first signs of discontent were revealed when Daniher met with Swans CEO Tom Harley in Sydney. Speculation continued to mount throughout the year and came to a head on the 5th of October when Joe officially requested a trade to the Swans. In a real sliding doors moment, the Bombers would unsurprisingly play hardball, with the notorious Adrian Dodoro insisting that a player had to be included in the deal. The Swans had their own want-away in Tom Papley, who had requested a trade back to Victoria, and in particular Carlton, who owned pick 9 in the draft. The Swans had their own pick 5 to negotiate with, and thought they had more than enough to satisfy Essendon. Swans football manager Charlie Gardner stated, "In the end, it was made pretty clear to us that pick 5 and pick 9, or 2 first-round picks, wasn't going to be enough. So it's a bit moot now. We weren't able to satisfy Essendon with draft selections." Dodoro wouldn't budge, trusting that the club could change Daniher's mind. How wrong they were. They knocked back pick 5 and pick 9, which could have been Hayden Young and Cozzy Pickett, or Caleb Sarong and Sam Flanders. Wrong move again. A year later, they would be forced to take the free agency compensation when Daniher walked. Pick 8 alone. Now, how do things play out if Papley gets to Carlton? Daniher takes the mantle as the Swans' spearhead, and the Dons pick 2 young superstars. Do the Blues win the 2023 prelim against a Daniher-less Lions with Papley at the feet of Curnow and Mackay? Do the Swans give Daniher the same amount of slack and anonymity that the Lions did in order to get him to fall in love with the game again? Are the Bombers better equipped to end their finals curse with 2 genuine guns emerging? It's all a moot point now, but one non-move really could have changed the fortunes of 4 football clubs. In November, Daniher would confirm that his frustrations with injury were the cause of his trade request, hoping that a fresh start might help to reignite his career. In January of 2020, Joe was in Ireland, receiving yet more treatment on his troublesome groin. Joe would manage to get on the park for the final 4 games of the COVID-shortened 2020 season, but had very limited impact. He would take 10 marks and kick 3 goals in his return match, a victory against the Hawks. In his final 3 games, he would not register a major. An inglorious ending to his time in the red and black. Cut down in his prime years, Joe became somewhat of a forgotten man as his contemporaries surged ahead in production. The Bombers would offer their injury-plagued star a 4-year deal, but he would turn his back on the club he had once loved so much. Some in the industry suggested that Sydney was taking too big a risk in once again trying to lure the big man up north. And really, who could blame them?
It'd be a roll of the dice to bring
You
him in.
can't have Reid, Franklin and Daniher all injury prone in your forward line. So for the Swans, how about we draft a key forward? I don't expect them to be in the premiership window moving forward. They finished 15th last year without Franklin and him maybe not playing much at all in the last 3 years. I don't think they can win the premiership in the next 3 years.
It's difficult not to look a gift horse in the mouth, though. This is a player who is saying, I want to come up to Sydney.
I understand that, but there's a lot of players that want to go to a club. You're not going to just take the risk of a player that hasn't played for 18 months, hardly, and even in this period has not been able to get himself
Sam
right.
Reid would probably be the case. Speaking of Daniher, he revealed on the weekend, or it was revealed on the weekend, that he's living regionally in Victoria.
Couldn't believe this.
How did it hit you?
Hutchie, there's Tom Bell Chambers, an article and a quote from Tom Bell Chambers there. He's made a couple of lifestyle changes. He's living out close to me in Dalesford. Now, I don't know the demographics of Melbourne too well, Hutchie, but I've done a Google search.
Melbourne.
Yeah, correct. The pronunciation also gets me, but it's an hour and 12 minutes away, his home, to Essendon's facility, which means he's spending 2 hours and 24 minutes in a car every day. If I've got bad groins, and I've had an issue with bad groins, the last thing I'm doing is sitting in a car for 2 hours, 2.5 hours a day. I mean, you might say it's a small one, but his career is on the line. His professionalism has been questioned by former teammate Brendan Goddard. That's not a smart decision.
Now, I never realised this at the time, But the fact that Joe was living in Daylesford shows where his mindset was at. He was done with the fishbowl that is Melbourne. When decision time came, the Daniher name would no longer be at Windy Hill, as he pulled a surprise and spurned both the Bombers and the Swans, signing a 3-year deal with the Brisbane Lions. It's the most incredibly unfortunate thing in sports, when a highly talented player gets cut down with injury. It seems to always happen right as they are about to explode to the next level. All clubs have these sad stories, but one that always stuck out to me was David Schwartz from Melbourne. In the 1994 season, he looked to be headed to Wayne Carey territory, only to have his career ripped apart by multiple ACL injuries. Adam Cooney was another who springs to mind. His 2008 season was as electrifying as Chris Judd, yet a broken kneecap in the final series of the same season robbed him of his explosiveness, and he was never the same player again. The Daniher family had already experienced this type of heartbreak, with Joe's uncle Neil struck down in his prime, and it had now happened to Joe himself. Who knows how good Joe Daniher could have been, and what heights he could have reached had it not been for injuries. The move up north had put an end to this frustrating chapter of his story so far. But could he rebuild his body along with his mind? Before the season was even underway, the Brisbane players were already lauding Daniher's impact on the group and quiet form of leadership. Dane Zorko stating that his knowledge and the way he conducts himself and helps other players has been first class. He's the sort of person that when he talks, everyone listens. He doesn't say a lot, but when he does, it has so much meaning and power behind it. He's getting more comfortable talking out more, which is great. And he's really starting to take ownership of that forward line, which is an area we probably haven't had a lot of leadership in previous years. On the field was a seamless transition for Daniher, as he became just one member of an extremely well-functioning forward line. Where he was once the main focal point of the Bombers' offense, as a Lion, he was simply required to play his role. Charlie Cameron would lead the goal kicking, whilst the likes of Dan McStay, Eric Hipwood, Lincoln McCarthy and Zach Bailey would all kick over 20 goals for the season. Joe's body managed to adjust, and he played in more games during the 2021 season than he did for the 3 previous seasons combined. Daniher would kick 46 goals from 24 matches as part of a forward line that would produce over 2,100 points for the home and away season. A clear number 1 in the comp. To twist the knife into Bombers fans even more, Joe would save his best performance for the season for his former club, gathering a career-high 25 disposals, 8 marks, 6 hitouts, 2 goals and picking up Brownlow votes in a round 5 victory against Essendon. By the time the finals rolled around, the Lions were flying, having won 14 of their final 18 games of the season, finishing with the league's highest percentage and another top 4 finish. Daniher would be held goalless in week 1 of the finals, as Melbourne's league-leading defence made a mockery of Brisbane's league-leading offence, holding them to just 60 points. The knives came out the following week as the Lions were bundled out in straight sets at home, their 5th finals loss from 6 attempts in 3 seasons. Daniher would be held to just the 6 possessions, and rightly so, the media didn't miss when evaluating his game.
He really enjoys playing. He looks like he plays for fun sometimes, and that's okay. But the Brisbane Lions, when they recruited him, they thought that they were getting something great, Kane. And at this stage, I think there has to be a shift in his application, the way that he goes about his football. Does he really want to be a great player? Does he really want to dominate a game of AFL football? I reckon there's still unanswered questions about Joe and his attitude towards the game.
I think that's an excellent point. One bad game, that's fine. Tall forward, toughest position to play in the ground. You're going to have bad nights, but then it's how you respond. Thought Norton responded last week by doing that. So how fully professional is Joe and how far does he want to go? At his age, we've probably got the answer.
Former teammate Brendan Goddard had once questioned Joe's professionalism and dedication to his craft. Now the media was growing increasingly more frustrated as Daniher's goofy and playful nature on the field portrayed him as not really caring too much about the end result. And I was right there with them. Joe was as frustrating a player to watch as any I had seen in my 40 odd years of watching the game. From the outside looking in, he just didn't seem to take the game seriously. Prior to the 2022 season, Daniher would extend his contract with the Lions through until the end of 2025, just 1 year after signing his initial 3-year deal with the club. The signing sparked controversy and triggered a league investigation as rival clubs pondered whether the Lions and Bombers had rigged the system in order for the Bombers to gain the maximum compensation for Daniher's departure. The deal was given the green light. The Lions and Joe Daniher would burst out of the blocks in 2022. Joey kicked 19 goals in the first 6 weeks of the season, as Brisbane started the season 5-1. However, the dreaded injury curse would strike against the Swans in round 7. Joe would return for the second half of the season, but could not reproduce his output from earlier in the year, kicking just 17 goals from the final 10 matches of the home and away season. Lions coach Chris Fagan would later reveal that Joey's shoulder would pop out at least once a week, and that Daniher had played out the season in a considerable amount of pain. In week 1 of the finals, Daniher would kick the match winner, his third for the game, as the Lions put an end to the Tigers dynasty. The following week, against the Cats, he would lay 0 tackles, have just the 2 contested possessions, and was held goalless again as Geelong eliminated Brisbane. A 4th consecutive season of finals disappointment. In March of 2023, Joe put in a shocking performance against the Bulldogs, kicking 4 behinds from 7 possessions. He played selfishly, burning teammates, and the media really went after him. Kane Cornes was particularly scathing, and at the time, I agreed with every single word he said.
Just wrap their arms around him every time, and I can't understand it.
But I wonder how if they've gone the opposite way and said, Joe, you don't mean to miss goals. Keep working at it and we'll try and get someone in to help and all that. But the attitude to stop, not chase, when you've been around for, 10 years maybe, Joey Daniher, I wonder just how hard they've been on him in that situation. Because I see the killer instinct in Jeremy Cameron to run down, chase players, the premiership type players that get to the dais and they win premierships as key forwards. He's not looking one at the moment after all this time with what he's like when he doesn't have the ball in his hands.
And he'd be such a frustrating teammate to play with, Loathe. So a week ago, this was him demanding the ball from Hipwood. You can see him in the goal squares demanding it. So that body language isn't good as a teammate, and that's why he would be a frustrating teammate to play with. Now, Brisbane eventually, the ball, Hipwood missed, it goes back out, and Link McCarthy kicks a goal. And then this is the discussion between Daniher and Hipwood. I mean, that's the body language a week ago. And then the very next week, when he's demanding that from his teammates, he does that and ignores Charlie Cameron in the goal square. That's why he would be a frustrating player to play with. And
That's appalling.
Maybe you should, but they're just a box of chocolates, that forward line at the Brisbane Lions. You never know what Eric's going to do. You've got no certainty in what Joe did. There was a moment last night where the forwards were charging forward, Charlie Cameron out the back, Jack Gunston free in the corridor charging inside 50. He's had the big third term. He kicked 3 goals. Halfway through the last, it's line ball who's going to win the game. And Joe turns from 52 metres out and has a shot. And he wasn't having the sort of night that was going to give you any confidence he'd kick it. I just thought, you know what, that is them in a nutshell.
Well, I'll say it. They can't win the premiership with Daniher and Hipwood.
So with only 18 months left in his career, how did I go from a complete dislike of Joe and how he went about his footy and agreeing wholeheartedly with the Corn that the Lions would never win a flag with him in their team, to Daniher becoming one of, if not my favourite player in the league? Well, it was not long after this when I discovered that Joe lived in Byron Bay and was completing a 4-hour round trip just to get to training and back. I found it fascinating that this guy was so determined to stay out of the spotlight that he would live in another state. Then the article went on to mention that Daniher didn't have a TV and would just completely unplug from the game and seemingly the outside world. In some ways, his journey had mirrored my own. I too had moved from the big city to northern New South Wales in my 20s. After everything that transpired during the COVID period, I too had unplugged from society and enjoyed the seclusion of living on the land. But most importantly, in 2023, I found a sense of joy that hadn't always been prevalent in my life. I'd always been too serious and worked too hard and focused more on my career than my lifestyle. With this more light-hearted perspective on life, I'd found that I was becoming increasingly more entertained by Joe rather than the frustration that I once felt when watching him play. I marvelled at his ridiculous talent when he would play well, and laugh along with him when he would inevitably stuff up. In this increasingly more robotic world, Big Joe Daniher was the least robotic player in the league, and I absolutely loved it. I began to ride every bump and watched as many Brisbane games as I could. If my own team couldn't win it, I was hoping that the Lions, and in particular Joey, would. Brisbane were a dominant team again in 2023, and Daniher would have a super productive season, kicking 61 goals, leading the Lions goal kicking for the first time, and this time both the team and Joe would perform superbly in September. Daniher had 16 touches and kicked 5 against the Power in the qualifying final. In the prelim against the Blues, he would have 14 and kicked 2, as the Lions came back from a substantial early deficit. In the grand final, Joe was enormous. 8 marks, 3 of which were contested, 16 touches, and 3 big goals. The Lions would fall agonisingly short, but lost no admirers. They had given their all. Joe had given it his all, and they had come up just short against an irrepressible Magpies team. 2024 started off disastrously for the Brisbane Lions. At 2-5, they were in serious danger of missing finals altogether. Unbelievably, they would lose just 3 more games for the rest of the year. Daniher would once again play every game and lead the Lions goal kicking with 58 majors. It wasn't enough to keep the critics at bay. In a late season loss again to the Magpies, Joe would have 16 touches and kick 4 goals. He would also make some costly errors and miss a clutch shot at goal that might have put the game away in the last quarter. A very Joe type of performance, and Kane Cornes was having none of it.
I tell you what I do get sick of a little bit. The Joe's Joe. Oh, no, it may be harsh just to focus on one player, but that Joe's Joe. Well, Joe's not Joe when he's kicking torps at a critical stage halfway through the third quarter, or he's lining up from 35 metres directly in front to put them 23 points up for a top 2 finish, and he sprays it. Or he burns his teammate, which you've been strong on right from the start of the year, and even prior to that, many people have had that thought. Joe's just not Joe. What are we coaching Joe not to be Joe? Like, I don't know. I just think that, I said last year, really early, may have been round 3, they won't win the premiership with Daniher and Hipwood. And I nearly was made to look foolish. Like, it could have easily happened, but I don't know if they will. Like, Hipwood got his big 7-year deal. I haven't seen him since. Where's Hipwood? What do we talk about Eric Hipwood? Like, where is he? Like, and Joe's Joe. Like, so, and maybe, and I said after the game on the week, like, this is why he'll never be a superstar of the game. Like, a good player, kicked 49 goals for the year. We'd all like a player as talented as Joe Daniher, but the Joe's Joe talk annoys me. That frustrates me.
Well, Joe continued to be Joe, and for the month of September, he was a legitimate superstar. The Lions belted the Blues in the first week of the finals in a game that was over at halftime. Daniher would play his part and kick 2 goals to go along with 11 possessions. The following week, against a brutal GWS side, the Lions were a goal away from being knocked out yet again. From 44 points down, midway through the third quarter, the Lions would somehow pick themselves up and fight their way back into the game. At the 27-minute mark of the last quarter, Daniher would step up and take the responsibility after GWS got pinged for a deliberate out of bounds. On the wrong side of the ground for a left footer, Joe would split the middle from 40 metres out, right on the boundary, giving them a chance to kick the last goal. When that chance came, it was again Daniher who took it with both hands. Matched up against All-Australian defender Sam Taylor, Daniher would clunk a strong one-on-one contested mark against the gun defender and go back and coolly slot his 4th goal of the night, giving Brisbane the lead and ultimately the victory. There is no Brisbane Lions premiership without those 2 clutch moments. Daniher would be held goalless in the prelim against the Cats, but was no less heroic than the week prior. Brisbane would lose the Big O during the match, forcing Daniher into the ruck for the majority of the game. Again, the Lions would have to dig deep and claw their way back from 25 points down in the 3rd quarter. Joe helped to change the momentum of the game, and improbably, this resilient Brisbane side into its 2nd consecutive grand final. As I've discussed in depth here, the Brisbane Lions grand final was their masterpiece. A deserving result for all of the hard work, heartbreak and sacrifice that they had put into their 6-year run of elite football. Daniher was magnificent on the biggest stage yet again, and had it not been for some errant kicking, he could have well finished close to a Norm Smith medal. He had to settle for 16 touches, 8 marks and 2 goals for. In a fairy tale ending, Joe would kick the final goal of the game in what turned out to be the final game of his career. With a year still to run on his contract, the big man was happy to retire a premiership hero. At just 30 years of age and in the most consistent form of his career, he had had enough. In a sign of just how much effort he was putting in, Joe had played 100% game time in 10 of his last 11 games of football and had done it 13 times for the season. In his previous 11 years, he had only done it 6 times total. Twice for the Bombers in 2018 and 4 times for the Lions in 2021. He had clearly put it all on the line to help his team achieve the ultimate success. When all was said and done, Joe Daniher finished up playing 204 games of AFL footy, 108 for the Bombers and 96 for the Lions. Early on, he was on track to have a similar career to the likes of Jack Riewoldt, Tom Hawkins and Josh Kennedy, but ended up having a much shorter career and kicking much fewer goals. All 3 men would end up kicking over 700 career goals. Joe ended his with 395. This total placed him just outside the top 100 goal kickers of all time, surrounded by the likes of Warwick Capper, Jared Waite and Anthony Rocker. His goal per game average was similar to players like Chris Grant, Gary Lyon and Matthew Pavlich. But they all won multiple All-Australian and Best and Fairest awards to go along with the longevity. So where does he rank all time? His talent was top tier, but his body, and perhaps application, held him back from reaching that potential. I'd love to know what you all think, so make sure to leave a comment below. Essendon fans, was his career as good as Scott Lucas or Roger Merritt, who both kicked over 400 goals in a more free-flowing era of football? Did he have a better career than a Travis Cloke or Billy Brownless? All I know is that he entertained the hell out of me, particularly those last 2 seasons. I also love the fact that he went out on top and at the top of his game. Buddy kicked 19 goals in his final season. Jack Riewoldt kicked 32. Tom Hawkins kicked just the 15 as he battled injuries this season. He could have gone out on the ultimate high like his good buddy Joel Selwood did in 2022, but chose to keep pushing on. It's admirable and does nothing to diminish any of their careers, but I just think it was perfect timing for Joe to go out the way he did. George Costanza had a bit on Seinfeld where he went through a stage of leaving the room every time he made someone laugh. He would go out on a high and leave everybody wanting more. And Joey, you left me wanting more, and you will be sorely missed. I'm certainly sorry that I didn't appreciate you sooner. Cheers to a bloody interesting career. As always, thanks for watching. This video ended up being way longer than I anticipated, but if you're going to tell a story, why half-ass it? If you like this sort of content, please be sure to like and subscribe. For you, it's the push of a button. For me, it keeps me going. See you next time.